in looking at the, trying to figure out what's new and different that Joel and Amy haven't heard today.
Oh, don't worry about that.
Thank you, Joel. And if we get really desperate,
Repetition
we'll have
is
Joel give
marvelous
another
to the
introduction to enliven the proceedings. But one of the things that I think what I'll take is I looked at your website before coming over just to make sure that I had the time right and knew everything, that there, I hadn't sort of called the day. You get to be an organizer after a certain time, the old habits, and all of a sudden you haven't made the reminder calls to see, is there still a meeting? Is it still, are they still expecting me? You think, oh goodness, what'll happen if I show up at 7 and they don't even remember that I'm on? So I noticed that the way your website looked at it, and clearly it drew the crowd. We were going to talk about the book about the Ninth Ward and New Orleans rebuilding, which it's the newest book I've written, and I haven't had enough opportunity to really talk about it. So that's a good opportunity. In my view, and obviously Citizen Wealth is here, the battle for the Ninth Ward. It ended up, it's a long story coming into reality. And the book has 3 parts to it, if you will. One is from the point of the storm, the background of ACORN and what ACORN is and what its history in New Orleans was, and sort of what New Orleans was itself, particularly the history of the Ninth Ward and how it was populated. The lower Ninth Ward particularly has become somewhat iconic as the story after Katrina. It's where Brad Pitt has done his, what does he call it? Now it's Make It Right, his Make It Right Foundation. They've built these 75 homes that are wildly unsustainable, although very green in terms of solar or whatever, but they cost an average of more than $300,000 to build. So you're talking about a very lower income, working African American community, about 95% African American, that now has this collection of architectural, unique houses that they have borrowed money at a subsidized price of about $125,000, $150,000 that cost twice that to build. So it's very sort of stark. People who've tried to rebuild their homes and come back in sort of cottage bungalow type homes in New Orleans next to these famous architectural oddities in concrete and wood and 10, 15 feet high above sea level, and the Lower Ninth Ward is really becoming a caricature of what it was, but it's still a very iconic area. And this was an area where certainly ACORN had a very strong set of organizations throughout the Ninth Ward, 7th Ward. If anybody watches the HBO show Treme, that's in the 7th Ward, and it was also a stronghold of ACORN in New Orleans. So at the point of the storm, ACORN had about 6,000 members in the city. And its project over the last 7.5 years has been, in many ways, many things, but a lot of it has been winning the right to return and trying to help people come back and rebuild their homes. In fact, the first 2 homes, and there's a picture in here of the 2 families, the 2 ACORN members who built next to each other, were the first 2 homes to be built after the storm through a collective effort of a number of organizations. ACORN had a planning conference with university partners not long after the storm in Baton Rouge. We sort of cajoled Joel to come down, and part of his presentation that's actually covered in the book was a very insightful argument about how you would rebuild New Orleans and what were the sort of economic drivers of the city's recovery. And even more so now, his points were salient that are there. He argued you use the port to rebuild, not the hospitality industry, not the tourism and convention industry, because essentially that's a very low-wage service-based industry and for all the discussion about the educational level in New Orleans and everything else, the education system was designed to produce a service worker population that, you know, could work to make beds and clean toilets and be the bar backs and dishwashers in the back of French Quarter restaurants. So it wasn't trying to educate, you know, aerospace engineers particularly. It was really trying to produce a workforce that would serve industrial tourism. And in this, you know, one of the things that we've now seen more and more, tragically, is that the port, the land along the port is increasingly becoming part of industrial tourism, parks and, you know, other kinds of displays that people in conventions like, and less a working port. And sure enough, if you look at the last 20 years, and this was accelerated after Katrina, New Orleans was the largest coffee port in the country. It used to be the largest grain port by volume. And after Katrina, this is a process that's been going farther and farther away from that level, but in 1990 it was the largest coffee port. Now it's still a coffee port, but very small. And part of what I was talking to Just Coffee people about is we're trying to support organizing in New Orleans by bringing fair trade coffee in, you know, through the port of New Orleans and buying it from there, as opposed to having it shipped from fair trade roasters elsewhere in the country, which makes it older, less fresh, et cetera, et cetera. And what you find is that even progressive coffee buying co-ops used New Orleans right up until Katrina, and now 7.5 years later still are not sourcing any coffee in. Most of it goes from Central America, instead of coming to the Gulf Coast ports, goes all the way to Newark and New York Port Authority, offloading on containers. And, you know, sort of what kind of crazy carbon footprint is that you bring coffee from, you know, Honduras, truck it over to San Pedro Sula, the Port of Cortez, out of there, and then bring it, you know, from Guatemala, whatever, all those ports on the Gulf Coast side, and go all the way around Florida up to Newark and New York, and then have to truck it back to Austin, truck it to Wisconsin, truck it to, you know, Ottawa, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, so part of the project became how do you rebuild not only people's right to rebuild their homes, because there was a huge amount of pressure in New Orleans to not allow people to return to any of these heavily flooded communities. The lower Ninth Ward was actually, relatively speaking, higher ground. The average elevation was over sea level. There are many areas in New Orleans that are 4, 5, 6 feet below sea level, including Lakeview, which was an upper middle income neighborhood, which was an average of 3 or 4 feet below sea level, which has come back very aggressively because people had the resources. They didn't have to wait. They didn't have to wait for the insurance money. They could take out the loans, where you had to wait for FEMA, for the what is called the road home money, the federal support, the difference in what people needed once subprimes collapsed in the Great Recession, the financial issues for working families that had owned their homes outright, that had a higher percentage of ownership in places like the lower Ninth Ward than they had in Lakeview, are lucky to be 15–20% back. I mean, we're still short 75–80,000 people who have not been able to return. We took